Years ago, along with pastoring a church, I also, at the same time, worked as a part-time chaplain in a Lutheran nursing home. And it was for some very dear people whom I came to love. And most of them were mostly in bed. And at the time, I was in my early 30s. And I have to admit that in the beginning, it was hard for me to do that. My heart goes out to anyone who is a nurse because, well, God bless them. But you know, at times I learned you just have to get used to things. You know, the smells and the sights of open bed sores and people who are crying, and people with dementia and swollen limbs, and just a lot of things that if you're not used to them, they just make you uncomfortable. And yet, I'm really glad that I went through that experience because it was a good thing. And I think that it made me stronger because, thank goodness, you do get used to things. And hopefully, when you do, that helps you be more compassionate so that, you know, hopefully my own discomfort does not get in the way of really caring for people. And it was also a really good thing to see families come and visit because it makes that person more human. I mean, they're not just a patient who has to be dealt with and fixed, but you know that someone loved them dearly as they were in whatever way they were, and would say things like, "This is my mother, and she is so loved and so important and so valuable to me." And I think in some ways, having done that experience really changed my perspective on life itself. I mean, if you ask a very, very simple question, what does it mean to be human? What is a human life like? And how do we understand life when it has so many stages and changes, and some of them can be difficult? And what is the value of a human being? Certainly these people, these dear people, were no less valuable in bed than they were when they were young. So how do you value a human life? And so today, with these questions in mind, I'd like to talk about life, about your life and about my life in a more general way, and I'd like to be as real as possible. And I want to start by asking this really simple question. How do you understand what life is all about? I think if we could, we'd like to believe that if I just make good choices for myself and my family, and if I continue to have a good mental attitude and I practice goodness, and if I'm able to use my faith as a help, then my life should go well. And partly this is very true. I mean, having a good outlook is important. And we certainly know that our faith, having a faith, does make a difference in the quality of our life. But still, there is this problem, and we all know it in our hearts. The problem is that random things happen to people. Random things happen to people, and they can happen to anyone. You know, accidents, cancers, army on the march, someone steals our identity, wind or water or fire take our things away, and ultimately we experience the end of life, and we know that even death is something that happens beyond our control. So even if we were to try to kind of like, snow shovel all the negatives and all our fears and anxieties kind of into a pile and push them off the driveway, away and out of mind and out of sight, still, life intrudes on us. And the cost of trying to make everything happen the way we want can turn us into something of a tyrant to those around us. So what is our basic, realistic definition of what we can expect in this life? Well, probably the most asked question that people have about faith, the one that people ask more than any other, is this: why do bad things happen to good people? Right? It's the most popular question. Why do bad things happen to good people? But if you think about it, that's based kind of on the belief that they shouldn't. And we believe that if bad things happen to good people, that's unfair. But what if some suffering is a normal part of human life? And it's not we wish suffering on anyone, but that it happens to everyone in one way or another, and that suffering actually makes us more human and more compassionate and stronger. Whenever Christians talk about life, and Lutherans do this especially, we always say that it's two things, kind of in a paradox. First, life is goodness and glory. Life in creation is good. Scripture says we have dominion, and that is we have control over things. The psalmist says that God has crowned us a little lower than all the angels. And we see that today. You know, Jesus is marching into Jerusalem, and he's proud and triumphant and successful and happy and in control, and even something of a tyrant as he goes into the city and turns over the tables of the money changers. So you could say, for the moment, for Jesus, life is good and Jesus is in control and happy. But the other thing in the paradox is that life is also a cross. And this week we will experience Good Friday, when all of the cheers have ended and the people turn on Jesus and horrible things take place, and we're shown that even the best person, the most focused, the most gifted, the most loving, the most powerful, the most right person who has ever lived becomes a victim, powerless, beaten, shamed, and tortured to death. It's horrible and it's terrible. And you know, sometimes my friends ask me, they say, well, why do you Christians talk about these things? I mean, why would you even have a service like Good Friday when it's so dark? Well, it is hard to think about it and to see Jesus die the way he did. But why do we look at it? Why do we Christians intentionally experience that? I think because the ability to face suffering is an important part of facing reality. Can you really push aside all the hurt in this life and pretend it's not there and everyone should just be happy? Christians would rather see life as it is, that to accept that life is both glory, which is wonderful, and a cross, which is awful. And no one is exempt from that paradox. Whether the crosses are in our own life or they're in the life of someone we love and care about. We see it there, and we know that these things will happen. And until the kingdom comes, it's not going to change. But this is the hope. This is the good part, that when we experience Jesus on the cross, when we dare to look at him even when he is dying in pain, it makes us stronger and more able to cope with our own suffering, and more able to care for people whose tragedies might make us go running if we didn't have that strength and compassion. And for those of us with a deep faith and who believe in God, this is a time when we also ask an important faith question. Okay, if this is a paradoxical world in which there is both glory and the cross, both glory and suffering, then where's God? What does God have to do with our glory and our suffering and being human? Where is God when these crucifixions arise in the lives of good, loving people that we know? How do we make sense of them and make sense of God? Well, we talk about the cross this week in order to see that he's not up there in heaven somewhere, that we're not alone. Where is God? God is right there. God is with the crucified. God lives there too. God knows. God has learned the ultimate human love and compassion. And God has done all this to defeat our worst fear, which is really death. And to put death to death once and for all. So this week I'd like you to think about Jesus' cross. And even come on Good Friday and sit with Jesus and simply sit and be with him in his suffering for a while. To care for him while he suffers. And to ask this simple question: what would happen if you simply accepted that suffering is a part of life? It makes us deeply human. And if we were not so afraid of all the bad things that could happen, because they do. Yes, they hurt and you can't get out of the pain, but we accept these as a part of the price of being fully human. And I think if we knew that, if we accepted that, we would become stronger and more courageous. And it might even change the way we live, because we would not feel this horrible sense of injustice or distress when difficult things happen. Because we know until the kingdom comes, they will. Now, it's not that I don't wish for everyone a good and happy life and that we all are completely blessed and we don't have to face difficulties. That's great. But we also know that our sufferings happen. But they're not final. They will end. We will live beyond them and will have life. And the glory of the cross will become one. Something deeply real and deeply human. And we will be stronger, and we will not be afraid of people who are in pain, And we will be more able to embrace them and love them and care for them, because we will have put our own uncomfortableness aside. And we will know the joy and the strength of being a fully human being. And I think that is what life is about. Amen.